would it make sense for the US government to sort of like ban the Photos app everywhere in the whole planet? I mean, could they do that? Like, honestly, could they just say that
Mhm.
phone could
Well,
they
this is
like
this
that?
is this is where Ricardo and I are gonna come down with a sledgehammer. Go ahead, Ricardo. And we're back. We're here again, and today we have our first guest.
Hello?
Um, yeah, Andre Staltz. By the way, is Medeiros your like second name?
Yeah, that's it's my real last name. Staltz is just my internet name because actually, if you Google for like Andre Medeiros, you get like a lawyer, a photographer, a musician. It's a very common name in Brazil. So I said, screw that. Let's just be a bit more unique.
Oh, so you've gone the full like Hollywood route of like change the name to
Yeah,
more unique.
yeah. I wanted something like that, but whatever. Brazilian law is weird.
Hey man, you could have gone with like so you could have gone with like Zoltan or something. You could have like gone, all balls to the wall.
Okay, so since we're talking about this, Brazilian law doesn't allow you to change your name at all, but allows you to
Really?
add silly nicknames. So, for instance, Lula, the president, it literally means squid. So his name is not Lula, it's Luis Inácio something. But he added squid in his name. Yeah. You can officially add like silly things, but you can't change. So,
That's very weird. I
yeah,
mean, the whole I don't know. It's funny to me in general that there's like laws around these sort of things. It's like like who was the first person who was like, wait a minute, can I just name myself anything? And it was so bad that the governments were like, whoa, 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 you can't do that.
And I assure you that we're going to find a correlation between countries with laws that don't allow you to change your name and a high degree of scammers or people
yeah,
just want to
yeah,
be serial into that kind
yeah.
of thing.
That's Brazil.
Uh, well, anyway, nice to have you and nice to see you in general. It's been a
Yeah.
while.
Thanks for inviting me.
Uh,
I mean, I really enjoy talking with you, and you really enjoy talking with Ricardo. So I guess we're gonna have a really good conversation.
yeah, so we're gonna do a whole love triangle thing. Um, just to be clear, like we don't really have a format. Like, I mean, I told you this in general, but like we sort of just chat about random things and try to kind of keep it very informal in my mind. And we can Ricardo can maybe say what he thinks we're trying to do, but in my mind, we don't really have an agenda. It's more
Yeah.
just like co-create something, see what happens. This is our first experiment with a guest. Um, and at least for me, I've always felt like like the blockchain world should have a little bit more influence from sort of overall open source and more P2P sort of side of things. Um, and typically blockchain content or crypto industry content is very like focused on, you know, financial stuff and, tokens and whatever. And personally, I'm not that interested in exploring that. I'm more just in general interested in exploring the future. So um, that's kind of, I guess, what we're trying to do from my perspective. Ricardo, do you have a completely different view? We're going to contradict ourselves completely.
No, I think that's a fair description. As I was saying, this just started as us recording our talks. So it was very much of a shooting the shit about what's going on. And no major agenda, just topics that we want to dissect that we
Yeah.
probably haven't had time to dissect over chat. And when you're just talking about them live, stuff comes to
Yeah.
mind that doesn't necessarily comes to mind otherwise. So,
Yeah. I've been in a couple of podcasts that are just a list of questions and no video, and it's just becomes a very weird conversation. So I'm looking forward to just talking.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then it's really funny when we disagree on one episode and then like a couple episodes around, we find out that one is coming around to the other's perspective or like we switch places in opinions.
Okay.
It's one of the advantages of not straight jacketing ourselves into a list of things.
But I think it's like, when two contrarians like
Oh,
talk, they
I
like
see.
both constantly have to switch in order to remain contrarian. But anyway, I had this, I had a thought, yesterday. I wanted to ask you,
And he's gone.
anyway, what I was saying, I had this idea that, we could start off with a question that I think is very revealing of people's personalities. And it's, how many tabs do you have open on your computer right now?
Ah, I can actually see that. 5 plus 5, something like 13.
Okay. Ricardo?
Uh, Good questions. About 11 on Brave and 4 on Chrome.
Okay.
Oh,
Interesting. Interesting. So we're like, this is gonna like be the revealing part, right? I have in the ballpark of 50 tabs open,
yeah,
I would guess.
sounds like it.
Um,
That's not bankruptcy, man. Frankly, I mean,
I, it's like, I call it tab debt, it's like technical debt, but
Yeah. So,
everything I plan to read eventually.
yeah, I don't know, like, if the common person listening to this podcast knows about programming, but, like, sometimes I've thought of tabs as basically the stack trace in programming. Because when you're programming, like, you go to a function and you need to do something else for another function. You go to another function. And when that one is done, you pop back and pop back. That happens very often with tabs. You go to one tab, you have to solve something there. You open another tab. You keep those open until you solve that one. You close the other ones and so forth. So it's kind
Yeah.
of like you're running processes that are long running and you're going to finish them at some point.
Yeah. I
so I
think,
have
I
I
think my
have two
processes
solutions
are
for this.
eternal. Sorry, go
I
ahead.
have two solutions for this keeping tabs open to read for the to do read things. Well, one is that I actually wrote a tab manager that lets me sort the tabs by the sites that I spend the most time on, and then also groups tabs together by site. So I just click the thing, it resorts everything, and sometimes what I do is just basically close everything from here to the right. Like I don't give a shit. That's just
Cool.
stuff that I open at some point and can die. But for the to do read things, what I actually do is that I keep, you know how Signal has this memo to self thing where you can send yourself messages? I have that on a 4-week expiration, and I just paste the link there. And if 4 weeks later I haven't reviewed it, then it's gone. It wasn't important enough.
Nice. Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of agree. I kind of agree with that, but I also think it's like, it's the same with to-do lists for me, where I'll have these like eternal processes that literally never end. And eventually I just have to like clear and then start from scratch in order to be functional again. And I mean, this happens in a very real way with my tabs, because even though I have like an M1 Mac, it just starts dying at some point, and then I need to reboot. Um, anyway, you shared an article from Strattree. Who was the author again?
It's always the same person.
Oh, right, because it's a blog, right?
That's a block. Yeah.
I thought it was very good. Do you want to quickly share like why you shared that article and what you found interesting about it?
Sure. So, like, there's this thing that Facebook is doing, trying to compete with TikTok. So Facebook is changing their products to be a bit more like TikTok. And so he writes about that in an interesting way, but then he also explores what he says 3 trends in content creation, that he draws this line from like text to photos to videos to AI generated stuff and then VR. Um, and then other things. And I think it's just a very, like, in general, his blog is very good. And I think that article is very interesting, but I also think it had a lot of things that are not quite like very correct or very like clearly correct or something like that. Just a good conversation starter, because it's not like you can just fully agree with it and say we're done. There's stuff to talk about there.
Yeah, what I've like there's many things I found interesting. I definitely want to dig into AI generated art and try to sort of somehow explore what that might look like in this context. And in the context of video, I tweeted this morning that like video Dolly is going to be insane, right? Because if I can just be like, if I can just say, I want a video of Biden and Putin kissing at a secret society event, like, and it generates that sort of believably and accurately, like the amount of chaos that that would create in the world is going to be incredible.
Yeah, so I have opinions about that. So just to give a little context, I use GitHub Copilot on a daily basis. GitHub Copilot is a AI tool that autocompletes like snippets of code while you're coding. Um, and it's very useful. And some people have said that it's like the most practical and useful case of AI ever or so far. And I agree, it's like really good. It helps me. On the other hand, it is definitely not like, hey, AI is replacing my job, or it is like taking the core of my job, because it's really like specific. Like, first of all, it can't do refactoring. Like, if I actually need to like change code, delete code, general like code architecture, it can't do that. What it can do is like, I'm about to type something tedious, I'm in the process of writing tedious stuff, and then this just completes for me. Like, hey, you probably want to write this. So actually, the biggest utility of it is just helps me avoid like wrist problems and health problems. Um, so I think AI, like like we have this thing, this kind of tendency of thinking that it will do everything and be the ultimate everything of everything, but you got to like tone that down a little bit, because I think the biggest utility for AI and things like TikTok and Facebook is that it's probably going to help you remix content a little bit better. Like, let's say you're producing a video on TikTok and say, I want a background of like mountains. And then you just say like background of mountains, and then it like creates a dial E, whatever that, and then you get to put that. So it kind of like will enhance the creator, I think. It won't replace creators. I don't think that's happening yet. It's kind of very sci-fi. Like, we're not seeing that happening with AI, the replacement. We're seeing just enhancement of creators.
Right now we are. I mean, the use case that you described for GitHub Copilot is what I've heard described in other contexts as kind of like a centaur, basically. Like there's a human and an AI part working together, or an algorithmic part working together. I can see why we are unlikely to get there in the near future for cases where you want a particular precise result, like where we're coding. But when what you're doing is by and large just generating 50-second distractions, I think we're gonna get much faster there. And maybe the prompt is going to be the creative part, like the fun thing, like I don't know, the being able to think up putting and biting, kissing in a secret society, cabal, as opposed to just putting and biting, kissing, right? So that might be the interesting part, but I think that for the 50-second distractions, this is going to happen much else, much
Mm,
earlier.
okay, can I disagree? Because like, the people who create stuff on TikTok are not like normal people. They're I mean, like, in the good sense, they are exceptional people. They are very creative. They are not. So yeah, so when we consume content, we're not just consuming, content. We're consuming like content, like things that people put thought, that they really put like their heart into it. Sometimes it's just like facts, like, hey, did you know you can like empty your dishwasher like this, or things like that. And I don't think like, so AI at the moment is quite close to procedural art, just like random numbers generating random circles. It's kind of like that. It is interesting because everything drawn on a canvas can be interesting, but I don't think it's at the level of creativity of the creators that are on TikTok and famous right now.
I I want to touch on two sort of like related things to that. Like I think the question of like whether it's going to replace creators is sort of like, so to me personally, it's not that interesting of a question. It's more like, how does it change the structure of society if, like, for example, single creators can create way more than they used to be able to before. Um, but so there's the two specific points on sort of the TikTok and Copilot examples. Um, One is on the TikTok side, um, and this is in the sort of at least alluded to in the article on Stratchery, is sort of like, do do people become completely replaceable in terms of the company? So because they have this like massive amount of people and they dictate what people see, no single creator has any leverage, because there's always like 1,000, waiting to go. While in sort of the Web 2, I guess the previous platforms, sort of more the Facebooks and Instagrams and whatever, it was very driven by specific people building an audience. And that gave those specific people leverage over the company and sort of in general leverage over society to some degree. And so that's sort of question number one, is like, where does that go? And I'll just say the second one and then we can jump between these. But regarding GitHub Copilot, my concern like would be that while it is very useful, if it becomes the default way that people learn to code, which it will,
Mhm.
obviously, because it'll make things easier,
Yeah.
um, then you get sort of a determinism for the kind of code that's created, right? First of all, you get worse coders, but this has always been the case to some degree as we get better abstractions and whatever. Um, but then do you get like on a more sort of specific level, like every time this thing is implemented, it's implemented in this specific way because that's how Copilot would have implemented. I wonder if that creates issues in the long run.
Hmm. A lot of things you said there. So about the structure of society that you said with TikTok. Um, so like in order for TikTok to be creating as a company to be creating more content than the creators are, and like to be creating the most significant amount of content on TikTok that people are looking for, it would have to generate like as good content as the world's most creative people. And I don't think AI is there yet. AI is basically like, or ML is rehashing things that we have. I don't think it's there. And I mean, there's like people who are interested in facts as well. Like if you tell people how to empty a dishwasher in a very interesting way, and then you actually tried it, but it's completely gibberish because it was AI generated. I mean, that's not going to be good. Um, but what I think will happen with empowering creators with more tools is that we're going to have more content and more content of higher quality because it's easier to create. And what we know from that progression is that uh, the value of content drops when that happens. So these
Yeah.
creators, as they will be able to create more and more amazing things, the value of their work or how much they're going to get from it or possibility to monetize will drop more and more. Because if AI is good enough at some point, you can just your imagination will be enough. So a lot of people have imagination. People who don't have skills have imagination, so they can just tell the ML like, "Hey, this is what I want to see," and then they can just tweak that.
Well, exactly. And so, like, does that then lead to or like one analogy is, I guess, sort of music, and how like like eh, the development of the music industry, especially from a technological perspective, has been like great for consumers, but arguably pretty shitty for music creators because they're kind of in this incredibly more competitive environment where they have considerably less leverage. And it creates these very large platforms that have all the leverage. Now in music, I've never had this issue before, which is why
Yeah,
it's very weird that it's on both my mobile connection and
yeah.
my real connection. Um, anyway, so
Spotify.
in the context of TikTok, does like because there aren't labels or like any sort of unions or anything to push back against platform power, does the platform then become this sort of like very dictatorial entity that no one can really like affect?
Yeah, so that's an interesting point, but I would say it will happen, but due to different reasons. People won't be able to migrate out because the ML algorithm is so good. They want to stay. So like right now, I have a problem that there is no good competitor to GitHub Copilot. I actually tried one thing called Tab9. I paid it for a couple months, and it's definitely not at the same level. Same thing, like if they start introducing ML tools in TikTok, the creators are going to get very used to those tools, and it will be very hard to migrate away. So I think it's more of a question of lock in, not more of a question of user or content creator leverage over the platform. I think it's more of a lock-in.
And on the topic that you said, demo of if due to GitHub Copilot, we're going to get a whole bunch of samey programs and programmers that are worse because everything is built in a certain way. Funny enough, that was the same argument people were using against frameworks and then against things like Ruby, and it seems we have mostly survived so far.
Yes, I think the question here is, okay, go ahead.
Sorry, I agree we've survived, but I would 100% argue that like there are, it's hard to maybe quantify because there's so many more programmers than there used to be as well, which is exactly due to these tools. But the fact that you don't need to understand as much about what's going on under the hood means that you get this like generation of people who are ill-equipped to innovate beyond the boundaries of what that framework allows them to do, I guess is kind of the way I think about it. And this may or may not be a valid question. It's just, I do feel like there's this sort of determinism in AI. It's sort of the same problem that you have in like, if you use it in the justice system, right? And you use all this historical data, then it just labels like the certain categories of people, like they're always criminals with a high probability, right? And that's not true, right? So
yeah,
like society changes, but AI may not change, is I guess what I'm saying.
Yeah. So like there are parts of that argument that I've heard over and over again for different technologies. Like Ricardo just mentioned frameworks, but like people used to bash JavaScript as not a language, not a programming language, and you makes you a worse programmer, and etc. Or just in general, if you can't allocate and free memory by yourself, then it's not a real programming language or something. Or you do write worse code because the garbage collector sometimes comes in. We've heard these arguments over and over again. I think, like, does it make worse programmers? It might in a sort of average sense, but there's still always very smart people who use those so-called crappy tools, and those very smart people will achieve amazing things, despite the flaws of those things.
And they will probably have the ability to go deeper down if needed as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or might come in through the crappy tool that they don't realize, they hadn't realized that they had an ability for this thing before, then realize that they have this ability and move on. Right? Which to me, frankly, on any area, anything that lowers the barrier of entry for people to experiment is great.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want one of those people who learn to program through GitHub Copilot and Ruby on Rails to build my financial system, right? But that's a completely different set of concerns.
Mm-hmm.
So overall, like, what is your guys' view on the sort of AI future in general? Is it like a positive thing? Is it a scary, bad thing? Like, where do you kind of sit on this spectrum of hope and fear?
So I'm not concerned about the algorithm or the things it can achieve and what it can replace. I'm more concerned with the transparency of it all, because for instance on GitHub Copilot, I do have like raw access to all of the repos, but I don't have access to the thing that makes GitHub Copilot be what it is. And I think that's the case for a lot of good ML systems, is that they require massive amounts of data, and you as a normal person you can not get access to that. And I think one of the important aspects of the internet and the webs that if we have had access to the source code of the HTML pages, there's like some transparency that was always there. Like you can, check up DNS records, you can see all these kind of things. And if ML is going to be very important to content creation, or just like I don't like the word content that much, but more like mind sharing on the internet, like the total share of thoughts on the internet. If ML is a core part of that and we don't have access to see it, understand it, or influence it, I think that's going to be a big problem.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'm a little bit more optimistic, I guess, mostly because on pretty much every domain, for instance, if we look back at the training sets for neural networks and machine vision, like it took a while before we even got like an open set of characters for everybody to run their experiments on. Right? This is stuff that eventually it comes down to people. I If we are talking mass content creation, chances are that yes, you're gonna have an easier time using whatever Facebook ends up publishing, like the article suggests. But that doesn't mean that with a little bit of technical knowledge, you just can't run something on your own GPU at the house with your own training data set if you want to create some images, for example. The Going back to something that Andrew said earlier, that imagination is good enough, and this is likely to lower the value of content in general, just because there's more out there. I I think that is the case right now, where everybody's experimenting with the tools, and we really haven't found anything in particular that really resonates. But I don't necessarily think that is the case. Imagination is kind of good enough, but first of all, not all imaginations are created equal. And second, if you're building things, I think that a lot of the work for people who are going to be doing AI-based art or AI-based content is actually going to be about curation, effectively about curating your original source data set so that it's easier to get images in a certain direction, about getting a good prompt that actually generates stuff that is more interesting, that something would say a less of a creative spark would get. I suspect that's where the difference is going to come in. Like, sure, everybody can take a pen and pencil and paper and draw, but not everybody's going to come up with something good or something different.
Yeah. So on that note, I think it's an interesting thought. Like, so we're talking about kind of imagination being the importance of the input and sort of the context of that input. But isn't that something you could build into an AI model? Like if you were able to sort of track end to end, like what kind of thing performed really well, what input was originally used, you could build a model that could basically produce inputs that would perform well in the future.
And if all you care about engagement, that's perfectly possible. But this is going to be like, this kind of like going to be like the mass market. Like you're gonna be able to come up with the equivalent of the McDonald's hamburger, and you're gonna
Yeah.
make a ton more money than someone who focus on niche. But there's people who are gonna be focusing on niches who can still make a nice living out of this that before wouldn't have had that
Yeah.
option.
And maybe AI is capable of creating fashion. Like it's capable of like rehashing stuff, right? But like fashion is like, oh, here's a completely new way of dressing or whatever.
I I slightly disagree with that, and the reason is that I think, like, in a very real sense, our creativity is rehashing things and synthesizing them from like past ideas and whatever.
Yeah,
And I think there's a pattern to that as well.
agree.
There's like
Yeah,
a meta pattern that maybe could be captured by a model, but I don't know. It strikes me that there is a path. And maybe it becomes this McDonald's bullshit, and like as quickly as some other sort of very mass market things get boring, it would get boring. But like maybe there's a loop they can create that just sort of it keeps churning. And then maybe, I mean, then you bring in human ingenuity, and then we start being like, well, we need a better meta thing. And, there's always space for like exploration outside of the system, of course. But it does strike me that there's like a possibility to create something that just produces like content for 90% of the people, like infinite amounts of it, right? And the one that does that first, they, I don't know what they become. They become just like the one earth media company or something.
Mm,
It also depends, I mean, about what part of fashion you're talking about, right? I mean, if you look at the business models of Zara, basically, it's basically Dali with mutations for a dress. Like, just take
Yeah.
this, switch the buttons here, throw it out because this thing tested well. Like,
yeah, sure.
if we're talking about the most unique designs that might also connect with people and start a trend because of something like, yeah, that might be a little bit further out. But I do think that on things like fast fashion, it's going to be adopted relatively quickly.
Mm.
Mhm. Yeah, like related to what you both guys said, like the article talks about text as well, and it talks about this progression from text to photo to video to AI. Like it's important to talk about the different kinds of content. Like there's TikTok, it's video and whatever, but that's like a minor part of the internet. Like a lot of people enjoy the text part of the internet. Twitter is still mostly text focused, even though they did the spaces nonsense. Um, and like blogs are very, very important. And, text is very important. And just a testament why text is important is because images have text in them, videos have text in them. So yeah, so I don't believe in that progression. I don't think we're gonna just like leave text. And I also think that there's a part of the internet that is still a lot about carefully crafted articles. Well, we do know that what's it called, that algorithm that makes good text, GP3, GPT-3.
GPT-3.
Yeah, there was actually one article that it produced that in the beginning it was fooling me. So like towards the end of the article, I got it. Okay, this is not a person, but towards the beginning, I was being fooled. Um, So, yeah, it's important to think, like, I'm actually not sure now if AI generated content will be the big thing.
Well, I think so there's kind of two things, but let me just grab onto the sort of progression in general, because he also mentions VR, right? Um, and generally, I think that the counter argument to the whole, like, so you were saying like there's always going to be people that like text, and then in terms of video, there's always going to be like people like photos. Um, and I do think that's true to an extent. But the counter argument, I think, is that we're old and we grew up on an internet that was, text and some photos, some flaming text titles and, weird backgrounds, but by and large text. And there's a new generation for whom like this sort of much more multisensory thing will be the default. And it
Talking in
will
memes and whatnot.
Yeah, like there's a whole generation growing up who think it's completely normal to like walk into a house and just start like talking to it, and then stuff will happen. Everyone who has like an Amazon Echo or whatever. So I do wonder about that, but then at the same time, I don't know what I think about VR. Like I have a VR headset.
Oh, I do.
It's right
I know
here.
what I think about VR. VR is like a roller coaster. Like roller coasters are very fun, right? But you don't go on roller coasters from Monday to Friday. Like you don't do that.
Yeah.
Well, like
Yeah.
there are some people on the internet who use VR goggles every day. Yes, but it's not going mainstream.
Well, so I'm not as certain as you are, but I do sympathize with that sort of position. Having used VR a lot, like they have like very like physiological problems. Like they have a sweaty face problem, and it's
Mhm.
like there's not an obvious solution to that if you have to have something strapped to your face, right? Like it's going to be uncomfortable. And then there's always people like, well, if you don't have a big TV, you can just be in VR. And it's like, have you ever been in VR for like a multi-hour period in one go? Like it's not, it's very cool and exciting, but you start getting fatigue. Like even your
Yeah,
eyes and your
yeah,
mind starts getting fatigued because you're trying to like parse this like the like almost similar physical reality, but not
yeah.
quite. It's like the uncanny valley kind of like you
Yeah.
just
You know, like I
yeah.
can find several analogies for VR. So roller coaster is one, but flying cars is another analogy. Like, like let's say in the 60s or 50s, like people thought that flying cars was the future, and it's been attempted multiple times, whatever. But it's just like this technological dream that people have, but doesn't yeah, it's stop it, you know?
Well, just stop, says Andre. But flying cars, I think there's an interesting thing relating to that, which I just want to touch on, which is that maybe a part of why flying cars don't work is because the world is not structured for them. And if, and this
No,
might be this might be a really stupid idea, but if
it's
the world was structured completely differently, would flying cars make more sense?
no, 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 because like they can fall, right? Like the rate of accidents with like uh vehicles that normal people drive, like people who haven't had like super intense training, like pilots, the rate of accidents for basic people, sometimes drunk, sometimes looking in the back seat for their kids, is higher. So an accident with a flying car always falls somewhere unpredictable. Flying cars would make a lot of noise. Um, it would just be like a complete chaos. Like no one would want to live in a town with flying cars ever.
Yeah. I mean, this is probably right, but the same
Counterpoint,
applies to drones. Sorry, go ahead, Rick.
counterpoint there would be that basically we're likely to get self-driving, like good self-driving cars before we actually get flying cars. So the people getting drunk in the flying cars is not a problem. Um, but actually the issues of like, I don't know, people getting locked into their Teslas while the Tesla is on fire would be a much higher issue if you're who knows how many meters in the air to avoid the noise. So no, on that I agree. I I disagree with what you said about VR not going mainstream. I do think it is gonna go mainstream for a few things like games and like short-lived experiences in your day, right? Instead of playing a particular game on the PS, you might play there for an hour. Particularly as we move, as gaming, as a lot of gaming moves more towards hyper casual stuff and short experiences. So there might be a niche there that we haven't found. I do think that AR has a much more has a much higher probability of embedding itself in the world as a whole. So
Well, one point on VR relating to that is I think there's a few like the one thing that's I think missing that would draw a lot of people in is kind of like VR, I guess it's video streaming. Like if you like if we look at, for example, esports, like professional computer games, I think there would actually be a significant demand for people to watch those games sort of inside the game in VR. Um, but I don't think the technology is there yet. Like, and especially related to like movement within that world. Like, we can stream a video, but it's like it's a video. You're standing still, and your head positioning may not even move. But once you have that kind of fine grained presence inside of a virtual world, I do think it creates some new experiences that aren't that could be quite compelling and make more people do it.
kind of like hopping from drone to drone out of a multitude of drones that are like recording a soccer match kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. Like I don't know. Like this is a dumb example, but like I'd love to just be like sort of standing behind someone as they're
Oh,
like making the kill shot in like a big final, and then there's like a million other people that are all just there like And it would be funny, like, if you could all see each other, but the players obviously couldn't see you, so it'd be like little ghosts in the game. Um, I don't know if that makes any sense, honestly, but I sympathize, or I sort of viscerally understand why that would be appealing, because I would want to try it. Like, if I had the
Yeah.
option of having sort of full control over my perspective, and probably an option where someone else kind of controls my perspective within the VR, that would be quite cool, as opposed to just watching it from a screen.
Yeah, so I don't wanna talk too much about VR, but, just to comment a little bit on that, I found another analogy for VR. It's like, if we don't say it's like flying cars, but it's like boats. So, like, a lot of the boats out there are just for entertainment, or just for, like, having fun. They're not for actual transportation. I wanna go from A to B.
Mhm.
You can, though, you can transport yourself from A to B by boat, depending on the circumstances. So I think VR is a lot like that. You can do work in it, you know, go ahead. You can do some useful things, but it's mostly for entertainment, as you guys just raised a bunch of examples, and it's clear that it's for entertainment, either short or somewhat long. Now, like AR, I think who was it that mentioned AR? But
That's
like,
me.
yeah, so like that might be more like a day-to-day thing, but it requires it to be like a very thin glasses that you put on your, and it doesn't look like weird. And the technology needed for all of that is insane. You need like a really good computer in a really tiny amount of space that has a lot of energy there, like that you don't have to charge it every 15 minutes. It's just we don't
It,
have that technology.
it does for it to go mass market, but the key difference between AR and VR is that AR has business uses that can help you perfect the technology while still making money. So the typical example of somebody wearing a HoloLens and having to go into the bowels of some complex machinery, who's actually seeing a path of the piece that they need to replace and turn this thing this way, right? This is something where the awkwardness of the headset doesn't matter because it's a job. Shut up, wear it. It's an issue where the thing costing $2,500, I think it is not an issue either because it is cheaper than training everybody to recognize that particular valve. So it has a whole bunch of things that will let companies make money while moving things forward and miniaturizing them, right? So
Yeah,
that's why I also think that there's more of a path towards AR reaching mass market.
yeah. I think that's very true. Like, there was this thing called Magic Leap that, they were promising to be extremely amazing for consumers and games and whatever. And then quickly they just, pivoted to industrial support something.
Yeah.
No,
I mean,
but
Magic Leap was pretty
quickly,
spectacular. Sorry, what?
I'm saying it wasn't that quickly. It was after they raised and
Sure,
won
yes,
their
sure.
$4.5 billion.
Yeah, and some years passed, but, from my perspective, it's quick.
And completely like faking videos of, oh, this is what we're playing in the office right now. So it basically they only pivoted to industrial once their investors wisened up.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, it's yeah. Once bringing in LeBron James to test their prototype headset that nobody else could see, no longer yielded more money. They had to do something about it. But maybe we should move on. Um, I'd be curious. So, like, you're writing a book. Um,
Trying to. So
apparently,
yeah, yeah, that's just quickly telling it, like, I had a bunch of ideas about the internet, and I kept, like, drafting blog posts about that, but then I realized that this too long, so I started drafting the book. So the book is in a state where I have all the chapters planned and a lot of the paragraphs planned, but I didn't write any text yet because I wanna be able to shuffle around the paragraphs. But the book is about the two different powers or forces that shape the internet. I call it the cloud and the crowd. Um, so the cloud is made of all these big tech platforms and, you know, literally cloud systems. And the crowd is everybody who he uses it and who shapes the internet in unpredictable ways, sometimes like by, I don't know, DDoSing stuff, or by writing Wikipedia articles, or open source, or just TikTok remixing, all these kind of things. There's like the power of who did this. We have no idea who started this. It just is, that. And uh how those two things are kind of like two sides of the brain, and the internet is the brain, who is somewhat conscious, but it has this like creative side, and this method. Oh my gosh, help me out.
Like a structured
Analytical
side.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. um yeah, and how those two things sometimes competes, how they cooperate sometimes. Just like as an example of the crowd cooperating with the cloud, like Apple, the way how they like really started coming back to mainstream was through the iPod, and iPod was based on MP3s, and where those MP3s came from Napster and etc. So like this whole chaos of piracy of MP3s was very much tied with with iPods, and Apple growing through that. So Apple very much cloud was like cooperating with the crowd. Um, and then there's obvious cases where they clashed. Um, not
Yeah.
just Apple, but you know.
Yeah. The, so that's really interesting. I mean, we've talked a lot about this sort of stuff in the past, and I've quite often felt like as a sort of software internet entrepreneur that really what you want to do is you want to give the internet what it wants, like
Mhm.
if you want to succeed. Um, and it sort of like I think relates to that. Um, I think my question would be like, so we have this brain. It's I would maybe I would add like algorithms into the cloud side,
Yes,
and
absolutely.
there's like a fascinating interaction between us and algorithms that is like there's a feedback loop both ways where we are being shaped by them and they are being shaped by us.
Yes.
Um, which is also terrifying because it means that there's almost like a deterministic outcome that we can't see because we don't have it's not just us doing stuff. It's also like that stuff coming back at us and changing us.
Yeah, I think that's the case. Like with me using GitHub Copilot, I mean, like the code that I put on GitHub is kind of helping GitHub to learn stuff, or even like the people that I teach sometimes programming, they will also write code. And now I am getting code back from GitHub, like rehashed in some sense.
hmm. So what did that sort of like what did that lead to? Like what is the I guess like if you take that sort of extrapolate this crowd and the cloud concept, like where does that go? And or is that even like what you're trying to explore in the book, or is the book more about just sort of defining it as it is?
Yeah, so it's gonna go somewhere. So it's taking us closer to transhumanism, um, but more on a like a global scale. Like I have to look up the things I wrote, but like at some point, like um, so like the critical point is when people start wanting to reclaim their attention back. So it's like
Mm,
when you interact with the internet, you're giving your attention to the internet. Yeah, but
yeah.
when the internet takes too much attention from you, in the sense that there's too much noise to signal, like ads or noise, and any kind of like attention grabbing thing is noise that you don't want, then you start wanting to reclaim your attention. You want to have more signal, less noise. That's from the perspective of the individual. And then what happens there is that people want to sort of change the algorithms. Like you said, the algorithms shape us. Like what people want there is, I really want to change the algorithm. So it's a matter of power, and it's a matter of shaping what happens on the other side. And the other side does not want you to remove ads. the other side wants to add noise for
Well,
many reasons.
well, yeah, and there's a problem there, because not only do they not want to remove ads, they want to increase the amount of ads indefinitely. There's no end state at which like a publicly traded company is going to be like, this is enough money. We're just not going to grow anymore.
Yeah. So like this attention war is part of the future, but there's also another thing going on, which is the friction to create content is dropping. So that we talked about this AI and stuff like that. But I think a more promising thing would be like, I have a thought and I can transfer that thought to them. I don't have to put it into words. I don't have to choose the best words that he knows. I don't have to even know the same language that he knows. Maybe we don't know. But like this ability to like encode a thought and to transfer it, that would like increase 10x the amount of information and thoughts that we can transmit over the internet. And that means that like sort of like the internet did help us to become more globally conscious. You could say we are more aware of things that happen everywhere. That would speed up that process. We would be more aware of things, and also to the sense of, to the point of feelings. A lot that we get on the internet is just information that we have to convert into feelings. Well, video, less of that. Video is more like direct feelings, but you can see how transferring thoughts would transfer also feelings. Like someone could transmit to you directly sadness. Um, if we get that. So if we get to that point, then you can see how we become more globally aware of things. I think that's one way how the internet could go about. And what happens then when you put the cloud and the algorithms on top of that? I don't know, but that's the exciting part.
Ricardo, what do you think?
Oh boy, there's a lot there. The okay, perhaps let's start back at the strategic article. I don't even know how to pronounce this thing.
No one knows.
The, I mean, sure, the algorithms, and we're going to get to Copilot in a bit, but because it's a case of this, the algorithms are there now as a tool that helps them like like basically direct people towards engagement, because part of engagement is one out of every end post is going to be an ad, right? So it's something that right now brings monetary value. Originally, actually, one could have seen this as a well-intentioned case of a cognitive prosthesis, basically. Like people decided to follow way more than their fair share of number, and they just can't put up with all this stuff. So this is just helping them sort out through whatever the algo thought was going to be more interesting to them, right? And then of course it's easy to twist this. The then there's a cognitive prosthesis aspect as well to what you were saying about Copilot, right? It helps you write code. You tried a different prosthesis. That prosthesis didn't work nearly as well, so you just came back to this thing, right? I agree that people may want to get control over these things, and they may want to end up wanting to tweak a few parameters. No, actually, they may want to get control over these things. I think that at most Facebooks are going to let them tweak a few parameters, and that's going to be pretty much it. And I sadly suspect that by and large, the results that people are going to get out of that, or things like filtering the newsfeed or sorting the newsfeed, are going to be better than the ones that they're going to get if they just roll their own, or go with like an open source implementation or something, just because of the volume of data. So personally, I think that the only solution out of that for things like Facebook is just to completely opt out. Either you trim the list of people that you follow, to a list of people that you can actually pay attention to. And some of these might be personas, which I think them when I have discussed in the past, where you just have different subgroups that you pay attention to at a different time. right? Or so it's either you just switch it to context space basically, or you just trim it to a reasonable number and opt out of the algorithm altogether. I don't think it's gonna get. I don't think it's gonna get to a point where people actually control it. People are just gonna roll over. People are
Well,
lazy and they just like
Yeah.
convenience.
well, there's a big problem as well, because like in order for someone like, you, Andre, as a user of some social media platform, in order for you to be able to basically like create your own algorithm, um, and make it as good as an algorithm that Facebook could create, you would need um, Facebook's data, and not just your data, right? You
Yeah.
need the whole aggregate data set, which means that in order for that to happen, we need open data as well. Um, and that brings us into like a whole new arena where it's no longer about like, does Facebook change my mind about things? It's more like, does anyone actually want all data to be open? And I don't know, right? Like it does feel like in the internet there is sort of a drive. I don't think individuals want it per se. I think individuals by and large want privacy, but there's just some aggregate force that just pushes you towards more and more open data. And cryptocurrencies are maybe the best example of this, where it is an absolute fucking disaster that they're all completely transparent. Um, Yet
The
that's
popular
how
ones.
you make a lot of stuff work, because that's how you get people to trust it. Like,
Yeah.
if you were to rebuild Facebook again and you
You could.
were just fully open, like that's then people might trust it, but they just wouldn't do stuff that
Yeah.
they want to hide.
I don't think it's that bad. Like Twitter is basically everything public, right? Everyone can see everyone's tweets apart from the direct messages. But of course they can.
Yeah, that
Yeah. Some hard
that's not the
caveats to
thing.
that. What you were saying. Sorry, Ricardo, I got me all riled up. So yes, like even if everything is public, because of the limited attention span of a human, like it doesn't matter. And also, Twitter is 100% not public if you try to scrape all of Twitter. Like, not at all.
Yeah, but that's not what you need. Like you don't need to scrape all the whole Twitter and to move it somewhere else. That's not what you need. What you need is just for people to use a familiar way. Like if they're familiar with Twitter, then they can use something very close to Twitter and keep on doing what they were doing, but now without the ads, without the algorithm that they disagree with.
First of all, that would be Mastodon, and it is inconvenient, and by and large, people don't use it, even though I
Yeah,
like it. But
Mastodon
the
is
thing,
yeah.
no, but the thing that you miss is that it's not about just having the data. It's about having data. If you what you want is to be able to curate your feed in a way that's relevant to you. It's not just about having all the data from Twitter available. Suppose that every single freaking tweet was available somewhere. That's not what helps them create and curate the feed. It is if, for instance, Temu clicked on this particular way to expand the details and to see the photo zoomed out. And the algorithm has determined that I like things that Temu does, therefore they're going to show me the same thing in higher priority, right? There's this whole interaction information.
But this is open data. I'm not talking just about historical data. That is data, right? Like, in order to build a competing algorithm based on what you were describing, this sort of peer groups or groups of like-minded people like the same things, which is, I think, how most of the algos actually do work, pretty much, like on social media. But in order to do that, you need to have that data. You need to. I mean, there's the interaction, but like the input into the algorithm is data, and so it's the interaction, the flag or whatever goes up when demo likes something, was available elsewhere, then other people could provide recommendation services as well.
And they could, but my point is that some of the key aspects that are necessary to replicate Twitter's algorithm are not open right now. Like your interactions with Twitter are not open,
Yeah.
unless you
Yeah.
explicitly reply or heart. That's it. That's the only
Yeah.
things anybody know.
But I think there's like a default algorithm that's pretty easy to implement. It's just like you show the latest tweets by the people you follow that a lot of people would like, and they're happy with that, and that's enough.
But well, I mean, this is what Twitter was before, right?
Yeah.
And I'm gonna. So I often catch myself thinking that that's what I would want. But as I've thought about it more, and I've been thinking about it because there's been some debate with like in Twitter about whether they should allow that and whatever. But I think we have a rosy view of the past.
No,
Where
like
like
yeah,
when that was the case, we had smaller followings, it was just tighter circles.
yeah,
Um, and now if you suddenly get put a feed in front of you where 80% is less interesting. Like this is the exact opposite of what TikTok is doing, right?
right.
TikTok is like only recommendations. Twitter is sort of in between. And I think the in between is actually like really tricky to pull off because you just piss off everybody. Like nobody gets what they want exactly. Um, but that is sort of Twitter back in the day. And I think most of it will just be garbage. Like
Well,
Uh,
you need to be a little bit more aggressive about unfollowing people. My view
you
on
need more
Twitter
user
actually is
interaction and users are lazy.
yes. No, I agree. I agree with that. It's this is what I was saying earlier about Facebook. The solution of this is opting out of the massive number of things and assume that, well, if Joe Bob will say something interesting at some point, I guess them was going to be tweeted. So fine, I'm just going to follow them, right? Not going to follow Joe Bob. My view of Twitter is the old school Twitter because I use an external client that just presents everything chronologically. And this has forced me to, if I want to be sane, I just unfollow stuff or just basically check specific lists. That is the only way to make it manageable.
yeah. Well, I think if we had something similar to open Twitter, then we could use the simple algorithm as a starting point. And for some people, that's not going to be enough. But then those people could tweak the starting point algorithm. I don't think it's a big deal. It's kind of what Scuttlebutt is. It's SSP.
I know. I was just going to segue. Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Great. Let's dive
Yeah.
into secure scuttlebutt.
Yeah. So secure Scuttlebutt is a decentralized protocol without any blockchain. It's very peer-to-peer, and I'm working on it. But I didn't create it. Dominic Tarr created it, and actually I met them through Dominic. So that was nice. And the very nice thing in Secure Scuttlebutt is that it doesn't have, like, when you open it up, it doesn't have a bunch of people just saying GM, when is the airdrop, but just people saying, hi, my name is this, my hobbies are this, I want to talk about this and that, and then people saying, welcome, hey, nice to meet you, I want to hear more about this, and there's pictures, people doing live and stuff, and there's no ads. That's great. Some people really have noted that, okay, this is a very different space because it's more calm, like there's more signal to noise. That's the thing here. Even though the signal might be like, we don't have all of the interesting people with all of the niche interests, so those are the strong signal, but it's still like real people talking about real stuff, so that's some kind of nice signal. It's not noise, at least.
Well, I think like, I mean, I've used Manyverse. I don't spend a lot of time there, but I sometimes check it out. And I think what you're describing is accurate. And I feel like it kind of, it feels like, a forum back in the days of the early internet, kind of like this community where you sort of, it's like walking into a room, you like introduce yourself and then people are like, hey, and like, but
Yeah.
it's all over the world, right? Um, and people do share very different kind of content in there, I feel like, than in most social medias. Or maybe I just don't see it on other social medias, but I feel like there's a lot more sort of just stream of consciousness, like everything from like, I was thinking about some very wacky abstract idea to like, here's a picture of my potted plant.
Yeah.
That sort of thing, which is, it's a very different kind of experience than most social medias.
Yeah. And like I'm working on it because I really want to help um the internet move more to the crowd part. I think there's an imbalance in the force there, because um, the problem with the cloud is that they have asymmetric power, and sometimes it's not about abusing power. Sometimes it's just about doing stupid mistakes. Um, if you have that much power and you do a stupid mistake that, let's say, deletes everything or hurts a lot of people or whatever, if there is like 1% chance of that happening, it means it will happen eventually. If there's 0.01% that happening, still for now negligible, but it will happen. So I think as we march towards this future of cloud driven, like global consciousness, we have to be careful with that 1% because it will happen.
Yeah, I fully agree, and this sort of a related point is, I think one of the greatest innovations of all time is private public key cryptography.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
there's like, we don't even pay attention to it anymore,
Yeah.
especially in the crypto industry, because everyone's just like, yeah, you have a public key, whatever, a private key. But like the fact that you don't need to have a password that's on someone's server, like that in the web as it was before, where like passwords had to be on some central server, there was no way of preventing like the possibility that it just gets erased, like everything is gone. Right. And private public key cryptography kind of, that was, I think, one of the real moments when we got the technology to give like real ownership of something to the individuals using the internet.
Yeah.
And I think they get missed a lot.
Yeah.
But on Secure Scuttlebutt, like maybe you could just really quickly kind of like go over how it works, because I think that's sort of fascinating and very weird as well in a good
Right.
way.
Yeah. So I've done this a couple times. Secure Scuttlebutt is a database that you have locally. So, all of these web services, they have a database, but they're centralized. Mastodon has a bunch of databases, for each instance, there's a database. In Secure Scuttlebutt, the database is on your device, and you write to that database with your public private key pair, just proving that, hey, I have written this. And then you can connect with other people, like using the app on their devices, and they're going to just copy paste what you said. Just going to replicate it. And then they will know that it came from you because you signed it. And that friend can then replicate it to yet another friend. So it kind of transmits virally. So it is not happening in a specific place. It is happening like through this network of copy pasting throughout a bunch of devices. And the way how people get connected to each other doesn't really matter as long as they can get connected to each other. For instance, sometimes so you could be completely offline, but you could like transmit it peer to peer, like via Bluetooth or Wi-Fi, or you could be on the internet. You could use what we call room servers, that they're just kind of like a VPN. They're like a server that you go there, you connect to it, but the server doesn't have a database, and that's a very important part because the server doesn't know what you're talking about. But then if your friend is also connected to that server, then both of you can talk through that server essentially. But the server still has no idea what you two are talking about. So even if the server eavesdrops what you're copy pasting to each other, it can't decrypt that. So it's just a way of facilitating connections. It could also be done like a true peer-to-peer way, but that's a little bit more error prone, and we're working on that. But that's it in a nutshell. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
And are the messages all encrypted?
yeah, so it depends. So we have two type of messages. We have public messages and private messages. You could think of public messages as kind of like Twitter, but as I said, they're written on your device as public. That just means that like anyone, like if you pass it to a friend, the friend sees it as plain text, and that friend can then spread it to the whole world if they want. So in that sense, it's public, but there's no like global lookup. You couldn't just like say, I want to see your messages, because you have to, like if a random stranger in Indonesia wants to see my content, like they would have to connect with me to copy paste my stuff, or connect with some friend of mine, that kind of thing. But we do have private messages, which means the message is encrypted and then it's sent to a friend. So only the people who have decryption keys can read it. So we have
Yeah.
those kind of things.
Yeah. So kind of like the public message is like a tweet, and
Yeah.
the private message is like a DM, except
Yeah.
there's no central server that is collecting all of those and
Yeah.
probably not non-encrypting shit.
Yeah. And it's important to say also that there's no blockchain, because the blockchain, you can think of it as a global consensus mechanism that uses, proof of work or proof of whatever in order to achieve that consensus. So here we don't have that, because we don't have so the blockchain is a centralized abstract database. It's not a concrete database in one computer. It's an abstract database that we come to consensus about. So Scuttlebutt is many databases. Like each person has their own database, and like the authority there is what I said is mine. Like blockchain is more like
Yeah.
everybody owns everything, kind of.
Yeah. There's no reason to like everybody doesn't need to agree that this message is from Andre because Andre signed it. So you know
Yeah.
that it's clear that it's Andre's.
Yeah.
Right. Um. On. So I want to go into sort of a little bit of a tangent related to Scuttlebutt. Um, I'm sure you've heard somewhere in crypto Twitter about the Tornado Cash thing, where
Mm,
a smart contract on Ethereum was put on a sanctions list, and it's being kind of like censored every which way.
yeah.
Like I had a conversation with our team about this like a week ago, and I was like, this is going to be big because it's such a like serious thing to be on a sanctions list that like most network participants are going to start censoring. And indeed they have. Ethermine has started censoring Tornado Cash transactions. And that's sort of changing the whole concept of what a blockchain is. Like we're sort of moving, there's a big fight now. There's some people think like it should remain completely neutral. And then like a lot of people maybe see this trajectory, which is like some of these rules will just get baked in via these kinds of regulations because the risk to the operators is so considerable. And so relating to that, thinking about secure Scuttlebutt and other decentralized social medias, we can touch on some other ones in a second. Like how do you think about, I guess, like illegal content in
Right.
this kind of network?
Right. So like so there's some comparisons of like Scuttlebutt with other things. I think a very close analogy would be the Photos app on your phone, or gallery, because it is a local database, and you can, write content to that database. You don't need to ask permission from anyone. It stays on your device. It doesn't go anywhere unless you have iCloud or whatever. And then you can share it to other people. You can share it via email or AirDrop or whatever. You could also take very illegal content. It's like you could take bad pictures, like I don't know, uh, the
Yeah.
dog,
Any
whatever.
on how to make a bomb.
Yeah, fill in the blank. So you could do that. Now, would it make sense for the US government to sort of like ban the Photos app everywhere in the whole planet? I mean, could they do that? Like, honestly, could they just say that
Mhm.
photos? Could
Well,
they?
this is where Ricardo and I are going to come down with a sledgehammer. Go ahead, Ricardo.
Yeah. I mean, they could. Why not? I mean, first of all, the Photos app is perhaps a very trivial example where people say like, "Oh, they're not going to do that," because for the vast majority of normal users, the Photos app is something that is quite innocuous and inoffensive.
Yeah.
However, it is trivial to do this for things that people do not understand.
Yeah.
So the only thing that you need to do, for instance, on Secure Scuttlebutt is paint it as an unstoppable way for terrorists to share information in an untraceable manner by just sitting beside somebody at a cafe, right? And that sounds fucking horrible, and nobody cares about Scuttlebutt anyway. So yeah,
Yeah.
let's come down on that thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a possibility, but we would like to frame it as a Photos app because it literally, I personally have not come across anything that's like remotely bad. Like I've come across very bad stuff on Twitter. I have not come across remotely. Like Scuttlebutt is honestly very, very nice and clean. I'd like to keep it like that
for a while.
But kind of like if we're like playing devil's advocate,
Yeah, yeah.
right? You were talking earlier about how the community on Scuttlebutt and the content is very different from Twitter, and I would argue that that is just because you haven't had your Eternal September yet. You basically haven't had an influx of people that is large enough
It is,
where the
yeah,
quality goes down massively.
yeah.
The average quality goes down
Yeah,
massively.
I'm sorry that I interrupted so much, but like it is different because on Twitter, you interact with strangers, and strangers can send stuff to you. That is not the case in Secure Scuttlebutt because I have to transmit data on the basis of friendship and trust. So, for instance, if a stranger comes on Twitter talking to me, I can block them. But so what? They could make another account and still talk to me. That cannot happen on Scuttlebutt.
You could just go into Twitter and open a private account and then just allow people who you like to follow you. And
Yeah, sure. But like, if I still want to be public on Twitter, but like,
So let me
what I'm trying to,
let me quickly just
yeah,
take this down into like a technical level, because I think that there is a very good argument for why this specific fear is not valid for Secure Scuttlebutt, and that's the fact that you have control over your local database. Right. So like you can just like it's technically, I don't know how you guys manage it right now, but like you could just have like a local filter or whatever that's like get rid of anything that looks like this, you
yeah,
know,
right,
as an example, right? And the reason I think this is interesting is because you have that local control, and so if you really needed to, if you were risking jail, you would exercise that local
yeah, yeah,
control.
yeah. Like, it's just a matter of deleting content. So like, if you can delete pictures from your Photos app, you could delete bad stuff from Scuttlebutt as well.
I
And
agree
you know,
with both of you with
and
that.
you know what?
The example that Andrew presented, right? The example that Andrew presented was this is an innocuous tool. Why would the government ban it? Right. And that assumes that whatever talking head just got the news that North Korea transferred some, plans using secure scuttlebutt at our facility or something, doesn't actually understands all these implications, right? You just need a stupid, ignorant, trigger happy lawmaker in power to ban
Yeah,
innocuous
sure.
app.
I
So
mean, like,
there's two levels of banning, right? So there's like banning, which is like everything related to secure scuttlebutt is illegal.
yeah,
And then there's a lower level, which is like, this needs to stop, this behavior, right?
hmm,
And I don't think there are very many examples of like outright banning entire applications. At least not in a messaging context. You can maybe look at some like torrent websites and stuff and make that argument. I don't know.
oh, yeah,
But
like,
but but my point is like, because it's local and peer-to-peer and decentralized, you have control over your basically local data, at least theoretically. Like you could exercise some level of control. And that allows it to be quite resilient if sort of structured in the right way, where everyone, like even just thinking about different laws in different countries, like you could have other countries which have different laws that you can implement those things locally. Um, and in the Scuttlebutt use case, that's actually fine because it's just you. What's interesting when you take this into blockchain land is if all the validators of Ethereum start implementing their local laws, then you have a complete fragmentation of the network.
mm,
Um, and that gets very tricky. And so this is like a consensus thing where you in Scuttlebutt, you need a consensus of one in every user's case, while in blockchains, you need consensus of hundreds. Anyway, I don't think it's very secure. Sorry?
What?
Because do you get a complete fragmentation of the network? Because if, for instance, if the only thing that you're not doing is, let's suppose that, I don't know, the trivial example, I'm not going to mine any Tornado Cash transactions, right? That doesn't mean that I'm not going to accept blocks from that somebody else mined that include a Tornado Cash transaction, right?
Not necessarily. So I see what you mean. So you could have a situation where like a transaction just needs to wait until the miner is in a jurisdiction which allows that transaction to go through. And that's probably true to an extent. But it does create if you think about it sort of in like at scale, where like everybody implemented these like relatively strict rules on what they were allowed to mine. The sheer number of different situations would be insane. Like if you think about it from a networking, like messaging perspective, like how much extra time it would even take to get those things everywhere where they need to go, like find the right route. It gets very tricky.
I don't disagree, but it's what I'm saying is, and it's going to make it significantly harder to get some types of transactions mined. But what I'm saying is that it's not going to lead to a fragmentation of the network unless the law is you should not touch anything that has touched this address.
Yeah. So if it's okay to receive a block and build a new block on top of a block which has a Tornado Cash transaction, then you can assume. So I'm not saying Ethereum would become dysfunctional, just fragmented. And so, but it would likely remain functional in that circumstance, and I think in general. But it gets very weird.
Yeah. Well, there's a bunch of cards I have in my sleeve about like Scuttlebutt not actually risking being censored by governments. First of all, like our security model is like we don't treat governments as like an adversary, like which is the case for some blockchains. And then like we do get funding from EU very often. NGI has given us funding, and it's like Scuttlebutt is one of the most easily explainable projects from NGI to the EU politicians. And it's like, yes, big thumbs up, because we do want an alternative to the tech platforms. That's what we're doing. And EU wants the same thing.
Yeah.
And like, if we can get to the point where Scuttlebutt is just like email or paper or computers, it doesn't make sense to say we will ban all the computers now because terrorists are using them. If we can get to that point, and it's a matter of mainstreamness and perception and things like that, then we'll be fine. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I can see you're very much smiling, Ricardo, but like,
Yeah, because I'm old enough to remember when you had to export PGP on a T-shirt.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, and there's this eternal problem in decentralized technology and privacy enhancing technology, which is like oftentimes the bad actors need it more than the good actors. And so like if you take the Bitcoin example, it kind of went through the bad actors first. And that situation can be very tricky. But at the same time, we talk about this a lot with Ricardo. I don't think it makes sense to be adversarial with governments in the EU, but I am sympathetic to people in places where it totally makes sense to be adversarial with the government. So it's a location dependent thing. I think like in the EU, we can build things with a very different starting point than in many other places.
yeah. Like it's
Right now.
Oh,
Right now, yes.
yeah, right now. Like it's like you got to think like email as a protocol. How much is it government adversarial?
I mean, hardly at all.
Yeah, because email is by and large completely
But still, there are
easy to
pedophile rings
intercept, and
via
they are.
email sometimes.
Mhm.
There are still
But
like
I'm
pedophile rings via email.
yeah, but like email is like very easy for them to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, you just say phone
So
everything, doesn't matter.
Yeah. Well, my point is like it is possible for the protocol to be like censorship resistant without being like outright like completely, libertarian, like tornado or something.
can I ask a question? Do you run your own email server?
No.
Well, apparently it's not very easy.
No, it's not.
So obviously governments are quite happy because they just go to Microsoft and Google and we're like, guys, hand over the emails, and they're like, thanks. So there's this general trend in technologies, I think, as well, which is that you have these like peer-to-peer things, and you can look at the torrents and everything like that we've created this peer-to-peer, where that is like the spark of innovation, but it is very quickly co-opted into kind of the existing framework. And my personal hypothesis is that this is kind of the direction crypto is going. And that's a good and a bad thing.
You
People
know,
get new technology,
yeah,
better products.
like
Uh,
if
they don't get all the peer-to-peer necessarily.
Yeah, so like if Scuttlebutt becomes a bit more mainstream, that will definitely also happen. A bunch of companies will engage in the space similar to the web. I mean, like if we want to be something like the web, then obviously there's a lot of big companies shaping the web. And I think that's kind of okay. It's about balance in the force, We want some kind of balance. We don't want necessarily everybody to be P2P radicals. It's more about can we go back a little bit in that direction? And
Yeah.
we start by like going there and then here. And hopefully, over time, let's please find some kind of somewhat healthy balance. I think email is in a kind of okay balance right now. I can migrate from server A to server B, like different providers. I have some
Yeah.
kind of flexibility there, but the government is like completely comfortable with like sniffing into things if they want to.
There's nothing on email stopping them from doing whatever the hell they want, right? And if, for instance, if they want you to stop from getting email on your own domain, it's just an issue of yanking the domain name from under you, right? And then you need to go to Gmail, which is a company that they can beat with a stick. By the way, I disagree that running your email is not your own email server is not easy. It is actually by and large more expensive than going to a service or more inconvenient. And you chances are you're still running it on cloud. But a few years ago, there was this startup that was doing actually a really nice appliance that you could just set up in your home, and that was it.
But
Uh,
do you do that?
I actually wanted to do it, but at the time I was living in Europe and they wouldn't ship to Europe, and it pissed me the hell off.
So
And I
it's
tried
not
to
that.
get it. Yeah. So running that appliance wasn't that easy, or getting that appliance. And I also think they were a little bit too early, right? Because they came up with this before, like I think it was like a couple years before people started really getting worried about privacy. It was like around the time of Snowden's revelations, but the extent of things hadn't really been exposed. Anyway, the thing with email is that you can do it if you want. It's just inconvenient and slightly more expensive than going to a service. So people just do that. It's the convenience factor that ends up winning. But again, the government doesn't interfere with it for two reasons. First, it was there from the start. It kind of gets grandfathered in, I guess. And second, they really get to do whatever the hell they want with it. Even if by and large most people were using PGP mail, they still get all the metadata they want. There's nothing there that is opaque to them by and large.
Yeah. I want to say one thing on this kind of like balance thing, and I guess these protocols in general, which is that I think we that work and like are in sort of the peer-to-peer and decentralized area, we often talk about decentralization and P2P as like the end goal. And I've sort of over time come to the conclusion that it's a pretty poor way of marketing anything. it's so like it's like saying the end goal of manufacturing is manufacturing. It doesn't really make sense. And then what we actually want is like certain freedoms or features or something, right? And so what you were describing, I would say like what you want is optionality, right? You want to be
Yeah.
able to move between platforms. And I think in some sense, like we should be a little bit more agnostic to like exactly how we get there. And I'm not talking about us three specifically, but just in general, like in order to provide the best user experience, which is what we need, we need to just get there, and then we don't need to always go all the way. Like we can make things better without going 100%. The other thing that I think we should have more of is open source. Like it's just it would everything would be objectively better if more stuff was open source. Um, and maybe
Also need to
PnP.
stop sucking at. Sorry.
You need to what?
No, we need to stop sucking at marketing as well. Because I mean, if you start calling your protocols unstoppable or censorship resistant, chances are they're going to come in and beat you with a stick. So you need to figure out better ways to sell it.
Yeah, and we need a better strategy if we're gonna go mainstream. Like I, this is related to this tornado cash stuff. Like I don't think we're in a position yet as a sort of the broader P2P decentralization industry to like take on governments. And I think it's very foolish to think we are. And instead
Yeah.
we need to find better compromises. Um,
Yeah.
and this applies to social media. Like I'm actually quite terrified of what decentralized social media is going to be, like the first iterations. And I mean, you guys are kind of one of the first iterations, but I mean, as it scales up, there's more and more, like someone will figure out something and it'll get quite big. And like when there's a decentralized social media that's, at the scale of crypto, like there's going to be some really weird stuff that starts happening. And there's going to be a lot of controversy, and we just need some way of navigating that a bit more smoothly than at
Yeah.
least I feel like we've done in the crypto industry.
Yeah. A couple thoughts there. I do agree that it's sort of unpredictable. You never know really what the internet is going to do with your stuff. Never know. I believe Satoshi Nakamoto. I think he had no idea that it would become like this. He or they or she. Um, And then the other thought is about maximalism. Like we do know, Bitcoin maximalists. There's like different kind of maximalism. Just in general, like let's say AI maximalism. Like people who think that everything will be AI driven. Like I think it is often more exciting to think about maximalism than it is to think about, hey, compromise. A little bit more boring. Like that is not typically the narrative that people want to hear. People want to hear some exciting narrative. But I think reality is often very much about compromise and boring mid ground. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so
Get to good.
I think, yeah, I think it like Anatoly, the founder of Solana, said it quite well. Like, and these important like projects should be built by people with kids because they're like, um, they've gone through a lot of shit. They have a lot of empathy, and in my mind, and this is kind of what I feel like to a degree, is like they're much less willing to see the world burn. Like they just. And I've gone through this transition myself where when I was younger, I was full on like, yeah, like burn it all down,
Great.
revolution, fuck it. Yeah. And then it's like, I have kids. I'm like, do I want them to live in like a Mad Max world? Not really.
Yeah.
Like,
Actually,
we need to find a better path.
so, like Rage Against the Machine for parents just means like kids messing with the dishwasher or something.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean
Yeah.
like some nice achievements.
Yeah. But there is like, we even on like a very like abstract level, we have to figure out how we bring new innovations to the masses. Like, I don't think we've clicked that at all. Like we just right now is this chaotic process of like tons of stuff happening, people freaking out trying to block it, and then more stuff happens and it's like a fight. And I don't know exactly what the solution is, but we need to find like a slightly less disruptive path to bringing about disruptive technologies, kind of.
So you're basically promoting what's the name of that blockchain between banks?
Oh no, fuck that.
Not that one. And also Mastodon.
I think
Yeah,
Ripple.
Yeah, you basically want Ripple, and Mastodon is
No.
pretty awesome, like common-wise.
So it's not like I'm not defining like any amount of status quo shakeup that is like too much, right? I think we want more status quo shakeup by a considerable amount than we typically have today. And maybe the counter argument to that is like the internet has already messed everything up. But I'm an internet kid, so in my mind, if like crazy shit doesn't happen every year, I get like bored. I start feeling like there's no reason to, what are we even doing here?
Yeah.
So somehow slightly quicker. And this is like, we could go into like looking at like animal testing, and we just have a lot of policy with the express intent of just slowing things down. And I understand why, but we also need to have a way to speed things up if something is good, right? And like and it shouldn't be, the fringes of society that have to like get excited about something for it to get sped up.
Mm. Yeah, I agree with that. Ricardo doesn't seem to agree. He's just shaking his head.
No, it's not that I don't agree. I agree that would be the ideal. It's just that Temu seems to fall more on the side of, well, I guess governments at some point will see the light. Whereas I do not. I see them basically as elderly beasts hell-bent on self-preservation, which means maintaining their own status quo for as long as they can, which unfortunately leads to this experimentation happening by the crazes on the fringes. Right? It's sadly by and large the case.
I like dualisms: government and fringes, crowd and cloud, public and
But
private.
it's another one of these. It's another one of these where like the balance is important, right?
Yeah.
And it's at different places in the world, the balance is different, but I feel like overall the world has shifted towards more status quo maintaining over innovation.
That's probably
The world isn't finished.
Yeah, that's probably because you want to go faster, but a lot of people think the world has gone way too fast.
I mean, so you were talking about transhumanism. I do have to admit to myself, I'm like 100% transhumanist. Like I want to go way faster,
Yeah.
probably way too fast, which is also like, if I have to be devil's advocate to myself, like probably a reason I should not be a government.
Yeah.
But here we are. Anyway, I feel like we should maybe leave it there.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is gonna take a while to edit. I guess since we lost them, you're getting the closing words, Andre.
Okay. Thank you guys. This was very nice talk. I think this is probably the most fun podcast I've been in, except for Tim's frozen potato issues, which I hope the listener right now doesn't have to go through them. But the internet has these kind of hiccups. It's probably due to the cloud.
It's always safe to blame the cloud, right?
Yep.
All right.
Indeed, let's blame it on the evil corporate that made it easier for the three of us to connect online.
We